Well, for more on trade between the US and Canada, we're joined by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and Editor-at-Large for the National Post. Welcome, Diane.
Hello.
So, Diane, what would a successful outcome from this visit look like, both from the US and Canadian perspectives?
Well, I think we had a very successful outcome. We had a much muted, smiley, backslapping President Trump talking with our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister is a very charming man who doesn't ruffle feathers. He doesn't do that. That's not his style. And I think they both agreed to disagree on some very fringe parts of the trade relationship and maybe even security. But you know, I think they got along very well. And of course, the fact is that Canada is sort of like the Scandinavia, the Western Hemisphere. And with half of the federal cabinet females by edict, just as in Scandinavia, it presented a wonderful photo opportunity and initiative for the two countries on the women portfolio. So that, I think it was a hugely successful summit from the point of view of Canadians.
Now let's break down some of the issues. We know that Trump has said he wants to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Now, one of the main reasons is this trade deficit with Mexico. But what about the potential impact for businesses and trade with the other key member being Canada?
Well, right now we're stitched together, the three of us, but that will become bilateralized. By the way, Canada and the U.S. had a bilateral trade agreement until '94. For about 6 years, it worked much better than NAFTA does when Mexico was added on at the Americans' request. The Canada-U.S. deal is very, very untroublesome for the simple reason that we have the same rule of law, the same institutions, the same democratic system, and the labor rates are roughly equal, so that no one is greatly advantaged at the expense of the other one. So basically, Canada delivers to the U.S. what it does best and vice versa, and it's probably the only truly harmonious trade deal in the world where the amount of exports and imports going back and forth are almost identical. There's very few surpluses and deficits in either direction. So it's, you know, it's sort of not broken. It doesn't really need a lot of fixing.
Right. Now, Diane, we also know that Trudeau supports building the Keystone pipeline that Trump has reinstated. Now, previously, President Obama had vetoed it, citing environmental concerns. So how highly does this rank in terms of their areas of cooperation?
I'm sorry, Rachel?
How highly does this rank?
What was the last part of your question?
In terms of trade cooperation, how highly does the Keystone pipeline rank?
Well, they're completely in harmony. I mean, Trudeau is sort of billing himself as an environmentalist, which he does try and do, but he has very meticulously stayed away from being an opponent of the Keystone pipeline, as Obama turned out to be. The reason for that, Rachel, is very simple. Canada may be environmentally concerned as a nation, a little bit more enlightened perhaps, but we need to drill and sell dirty oil as much as we possibly can, and lots of it. You know, most of our exports are the fact that we are now the biggest supplier of oil to the United States in the world. It's going to be 4 million barrels a day in about 3 years, and that drives the Canadian economy, and that drives the value of the Canadian dollar. So it is absolutely critical, and Keystone was very necessary.
Now, Diane, I do want to get to another issue that was stressed by both Trudeau and Trump, and this is the important role that women play in both business and the economy. Trump said that the U.S. needs to address policies creating some of these barriers for women in the workforce. What do you think was the significance of highlighting this role of women in the workforce?
Well, I think, first of all, it seems to be something that his daughter Ivanka is very well positioned to lead and is concerned about. But again, as I said before, you know, Canada is sort of a Scandinavia of the Western Hemisphere. We're very liberal, and we have done in our federal government what Sweden, Norway, and other Scandinavian countries have done, and that is by edict, by law, 50% of the women on the cabinet 50% of the members of the federal government cabinet have to be women. And we have 3 governors that are female out of 10 right now. So there is a great deal of interest in the point of promoting women to doing important jobs.
And just lastly, Diane, we know that both leaders said their country's security is obviously paramount, but they have very differing views when it comes to immigration, especially when it comes to Syria, and then you also have Mexico. Now, the US and Canada share a border. How much of an impact do you think what happens with immigration is going to shape their relationship?
Well, whatever people come into the United States can get into Canada, not easily. And however many people or what people come into Canada can get into the US, not easily. The point is we do share information about who's in our respective countries. And that's already done secretly through Homeland Security and the Canadian Espionage Agency and police forces. So they don't know to a person who's in the country, but they do share information. They don't, and they vet who comes in. Now, one of the questions in the press conference was really misleading. It said that Canada has an open door policy towards Syrian immigrants without saying it, because Mr. Trudeau has to be very careful and politically correct in Canada. But we vet these people very carefully. We're not an open door. We're not an open door to anybody. And that's very important.
All right, well, thank you for clearing that up and for your insights. Diane Francis there from the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and editor-at-large for the National Post.